But yes, we will be kicking off our discussion for today, and it is titled Police Brutality. And we'll be basically tackling what exactly police brutality means, why we're discussing it all of a sudden. Maybe it's out of the blue, maybe it has a proper reasoning behind it, but we will get into all the gist and the jazz of that. Why? Because I do feel like it's an important conversation to have. If you have been keeping up with the news tabloids for the past week actually, you will notice that a lot of outcry on Black Lives Matter has been going all around social media. That is on your Facebooks, your Instagrams, even WhatsApp stories really, and on most of the news headlines. And this is because a gentleman, George Floyd, may his soul rest in peace, he died, or he was murdered rather, last week after a police officer in Minnesota, I hope I'm right about the state, put his knee against George's throat, and he was handcuffing George, and George kept crying out like, dude, I can't breathe. But this person ultimately ignored them, and so he ended up dying due to now lack of breathing. So this caused a heavy outcry all around society, and there have been massive protests in most of American states, people crying for justice, crying for the cop to be given the death sentence, even for that matter, because at first he wasn't charged, he was simply fired from his position. But then everybody was like, no, that's not enough. We have to do more than just fire someone for killing someone else. Had it been a random guy on the street that had done that, say for example we were having a civilian arrest. So a civilian arrest is when if you see a crime playing out, you as a civilian are allowed to arrest that person until the police comes. So you are allowed to stop that crime from being committed until the police come. So say we were having a civilian's arrest taking place, and this incident would have happened. That civilian that had now arrested the guy would have been charged for murder. So why can't we do the same? Why is it just because this guy is a police officer? And those discussions inevitably now provoked society to get into this heavy protest. And as I mentioned before, just looking at the definition of police brutality or police violence, basically it's legally defined as the civil rights violation where officers exercise undue or exercise force against a civilian. And this also includes, but is not limited to, physical or verbal harassment, physical or mental injury, or even property damage. And in worst cases, it can lead to death. And that's what we're working with in society. This is something that should not be allowed, that should not be condoned, and that is absolutely not okay. And if we look at times from way before George Floyd and this incident happened last week, we had a case where police brutality was becoming more and more common in Namibia, especially with the launch of the Kalahari with the Kalahari project, basically, where now the NDF soldiers were being sent out on the streets to patrol the streets and to make sure that our crime is limited, and if possible we can reduce it down to zero. And we found many accidents in which these people were using their authority to take advantage of it and go as far as slapping civilians, hitting them and doing all sorts of things that are really not supposed to be done. They're not supposed to be justified. And our very own chief of police, Sebastian Detunga, also came publicly on our national broadcaster, that was NBC, and he said it's not allowed. Nowhere in the handbook does it state that police officers are allowed this authority to degrade or abuse their power in a sense that degrades the civilian that is being arrested. So, because technically we're all innocent until proven guilty. So why are we treating our people like this? So, of course, we've seen an increase of this. This is during the COVID-19 period, where not just now overseas or abroad, but looking at our own homestead, which is Namibia, that is, we've seen police officers using their positions in a way that is degrading to civilians. And even if you look now at the fact that we had, when we had our lockdown regulation, or when the regulation to ban alcohol sales during the period of the national state of emergency, we also found the fact that even though officers are now doing their job, they're catching the criminals. They are stopping liquor sales, both illegal liquor sales and amongst other illegal activities. They would still degrade individuals during this process. And there was a video that went viral by which this man, and he was a home brewer, he brewed traditional home beer known as Tombo, and it was in the northern region, right? And when the police came over and confiscated his home brew, they spilled the brew onto the ground and made him roll in it. Now, yes, I understand it's not as deep as the point of going to death, but that is also not allowed, because are we not all innocent until proven guilty? So these are things that happen in our home, in our own backyard. These are things that happen on a daily basis, and sometimes we also need to be able to stand up for what is right. But then again, it's also difficult to stand up for what is right when we don't know our rights. And I do believe that most of us Namibians aren't exactly sure. We are a little bit on a gray scale when it comes to what is allowed and what is not allowed with regard to how is the police allowed to handle us. For example, it is supposed to be compulsory for the police officers to read you your rights when they're doing an arrest or when they're arresting you. We don't see that happening around us. We hardly see anybody's rights being read. Even you, for example, if you're sitting at home and you're thinking, well, I've kind of had a little bit of a scuffle with the police recently and I don't remember them reading my rights. It's supposed to happen. And also things such as these. So what we do in society is, I feel we've taken more of a I'll just be a backseat driver on this so that I'm not immediately implicated in case anything happens, and we take to recording such things. And I'm not saying recording is wrong. Of course, it allows everybody else outside the perimeters to know what is happening, but I also feel like we can do more in the means of taking charge and taking actions. So I do have 15 things that you can do for your city today, for Windhoek, for your country Namibia, for whichever country that you're sitting in right now, that can help us end police brutality. And yes, I understand that sometimes we can't live in a fairy tale world and we will never go to zero, but we can get as close to zero as possible, and that is our goal for today.